Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. This is Jim Brett of the New England Council. I hope that each of you tuning in today, as well as your families and colleagues, continue to stay safe and healthy during these unsettling times. Believe it or not, today is the Council's 11th Capitol Hill Report virtual program since we launched the series just over a month ago. And it's the third of 4 virtual programs this week alone. So it's a new way of communicating, and we've hit the ground running, to say the least. We also miss seeing all our members in person, but we're grateful that modern technology has allowed us to be able to connect virtually during these unique and challenging times. As a reminder, tomorrow we'll hold a second event in our Leading Crisis series. This time we'll have several leaders in the medical field, representing Massachusetts General Hospital and Boston University School of Medicine. Next week, we'll host programs with Congressman Zach Moulton, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston President Eric Rosengren, and then a little switch. We're going to have Charlie Cook, who is probably one of the best political analysts that anyone has heard. We've been fortunate to secure his presence for a short period of time next week. We're very excited about that. But today, we are very pleased to welcome the Honorable Angus King, United States Senator for the great state of Maine. As you all know, he's serving in the second term in the upper branch of Congress, and previously served 2 terms as the great governor of the state of Maine. Capitol Hill, many of you know, he serves on some very important committees, giving him the opportunity to advocate for our region on a range of important issues. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Energy and the Natural Resources Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Rules and Administration Committee. Like many of his colleagues in the New England delegation, the senator has been working tirelessly in recent weeks to support his state and our entire region and the entire country as we grapple with this devastating effects of this virus on both physical health, but also on the economic well-being. And as Congress now considers 4th round of major relief and economic stimulus legislation, we're on it. That the senator could take time to join us this morning to share his insights on the process and the timing, as well as his priorities on what any future stimulus or relief legislation should look like. So with that, we have many questions from many of his constituents from the great state, and hopefully with time permitted, I'll get to many of them, if not all of them. So I'm pleased to hand it over now to the Honorable United States Senator, a very good friend, Angus King.
Well, Jim, it's great to be with you, even though we're not upstairs at Pretty Flaherty or down here in an office. I'm glad to be able to join so many of your members, as it's always fun. And what's that poster behind you, Jim? Is that something about some World Series thing?
Having faith. In 2004, the Red Sox winning the World Series. Do you believe? So, more than ever.
You know, it's funny. It's funny. I wrote a thing the other day that said, you know, you can remember who your 4th grade teacher is, but nobody can tell you who won the World Series in any given year except 2004. We all know that date.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have to have faith, and maybe we'll see baseball in the summer. Maybe without the fans, but we'll see the field.
Yeah, it's possible. Well, let me sort of give you an update.
Sure.
My understanding is that the House is likely to take up the bill created by the Speaker's office tomorrow. I haven't gotten confirmation of that, but that was what we were hearing yesterday.
Right. Right.
Now the question is, what happens to that bill when it gets to the Senate? Because it's not a negotiated bill. It was produced by the Democratic majority in the House, just as the original CARES Act was a Republican bill created in Mitch McConnell's office and then was heavily negotiated with the Democrats, and I think a much better bill emerged. So the question is, will there be negotiations, and what will happen next week? We're scheduled to recess for a couple of weeks at the end of next week. The Senate's now in its 2nd week back. The House has not come back, and we're scheduled to be in session next week. I have my doubts, Jim, about whether what the House will send over is going to even come to the floor next week. I have not heard of any real negotiations. A lot of the Republicans, and I think the president has said something about, well, let's pause and see how it goes. and wait and see what happens. The problem is even Fed Chairman Powell yesterday, who's a pretty conservative guy, said, this is really bad. We need more fiscal stimulus. So that may provoke some action next week. I just don't know. I mean, I hate to sort of stumble around, but there's no certainty. A lot of people don't realize is that the majority leader of the United States Senate has powers that make the Emperor Augustine would make the Emperor Augustine jealous. Nothing comes to the floor without the support of the majority leader, in this case, Mitch McConnell. So he has an opportunity to either hold it up or bring it forward, or bring forward his own version. But so far, I'm not hearing much in the way of active interest in another bill. Chairman Powell's comments may make a difference. Hearing from governors and people in the various states may make a difference. But right now, that's what it looks like. House will probably act tomorrow. Senate may or may not take up a bill next week. In terms of my own priorities, my number one priority is help to the states and localities. They are absolutely being hammered by this in terms of revenues. And the problem is the first the big COVID bill, so-called the CARES Act, included a big hunk of money for the states and localities, about $150 billion. But it had strings on it, and the principal string was it could not be used for replacing lost revenues due to the virus. It could only be used for additional expenditures caused by the virus. Now, there have been additional expenditures, but I don't think it rises to the level of $150 billion. So, a lot of states literally have a big hunk of money in the bank right now that they can't touch because that money was distributed, but they can't use it because it doesn't address what the real need is, which is loss of revenues. And the thing I've been talking about, Jim, and your members, is this isn't aid to the states. The states are often characterized as this large sort of amorphous, institution, but it's really people. Right. And I don't know about the other New England states, but in Maine, 25 or 30% of the budget goes right back to the communities in the form of education aid and general purpose revenue sharing and that kind of thing. And so if we talk about not helping the states, we're really talking about pushing a lot of the burden back onto the towns. I know there are towns in Maine, they're already laying people off. They're already furloughing people. And because the states have no option, they can't deficit spend like the federal government. They've got to balance their budgets. Most states, I don't know about the Commonwealth, but most states end their fiscal years the end of June. And
right, June 5th.
If they have a shortfall, they've either got to raise taxes or make dramatic cuts. And that would be, raising taxes would be dumb in the middle of a recession, and cutting substantial employees, particularly ones who are delivering essential services, was absolutely the wrong thing to do. So I think that's the biggest challenge. Now, at one point, the president made a deal apparently with Governor Cuomo saying, I'm going to support a bill for $500 billion. Well, that was 2 weeks ago. So I don't know how solid that agreement is. Mitch McConnell has said, well, maybe if we do liability protection for businesses, maybe that would be the deal. But I don't know if those active discussions are actually taking place. There's one other development on that front that I think is important. A guy named Dan Sullivan, who's a Republican senator from Alaska, along with a bunch of us, I'm one of them, a bipartisan group, we have a bill in that would take the strings off the money that's already been allocated. In other words, that $150 billion could be used in various states for filling in the hole caused by revenue losses. It's not enough. It's not the Bipartisan National Governors Association said the real need over the next year and a half or 2 years is 500 billion, but unleashing the money that's already there would be very helpful to the states. And we almost got that done this week by unanimous consent. One senator, Rick Scott of Florida, blocked it. And what's gotten tangled up in this is the idea that the blue states are going to use this money to bail out their pension systems.
Right.
And so, I had a conversation with Dan Sullivan yesterday, and I said, look, if you want to put in a provision that says that's not in the mix, that's okay with me. I mean, there are places that have pension system problems, but that's not this issue. This issue is revenue loss attributable to COVID. So we're trying to get something worked out. If Dan's bill can get moving in the next few days, that would be a very important step. Not the full answer, but it would be a very important step to assist the states that are really going into crisis territory here. I just heard the other day in Maine, our highway fund is down something like over 20% because people aren't driving. Gas taxes are what supply the highway fund. So that's the situation on that. Now, we also need to probably look at some refunding of the PPP and also some modifications, how it works. Now it's 75-25, 75% of the expenses have to be payroll. I don't think that's turned out to not be realistic, particularly for businesses like restaurants that people are, they don't need people. They don't need to keep people on the payroll because they don't have customers. So we're trying to, I think there are some discussions going as to how to manage that process. The disaster loans part of the SBA has not been managed very well. We're trying to get that straightened out. I have to give some credit to the SBA. This PPP program was a gigantic program, total of $550 billion. And there were, of course, problems as there should, as you would expect, but they did gear up and get a lot of that money out soon. Now, it didn't go to all the places it should have gone. It probably went to some businesses that didn't need it or should have gotten it. There were a lot of minority and smaller businesses that didn't get it. There were problems with nonprofits, some of whom got it, others didn't. Some of the larger nonprofits were excluded because they had more than 500 people. So there are a lot of details that need to be worked out. But I think those are the two items: the state aid, and then questions about unemployment, health aid, testing, all of those things. So, and let me wind up moving away from the budget stuff. My biggest concern, Jim, is opening up our economies without a sufficient testing regime. I made a simple suggestion the other night. I said, give America the same testing regime they have in the White House. Pretty easy. Test people and identify those who are positive, put them aside, identify the people, do contact tracing, identify the people who had too close contact with them, isolate them. The problem now is we're isolating millions of people in order to protect ourselves from thousands, but we don't know who the thousands are. And the testing is the answer to that. And I think that's, and the president is, they're all beating their chest about, we're now doing 200,000 or 300,000 tests a day. It ought to be several million. All the experts, the research I've done, it ought to be several million in order to safely reopen. Now, there are lots of different opinions, and I'm trying to listen to a variety of the health experts and the economic experts about how safe it is to reopen. And frankly, we're going to see. I mean, we've got real life biology experiments going on in front of our eyes in various states. So we'll find out. Dr. Gottlieb was on the TV this morning. He said maybe the warmer weather is going to help. But what really worries me is if we reopen substantially without the testing, that we could be back in the same situation we were in early March, in June and July, and the reclosure and the damage would be longer lasting and more severe. So, you know, the governors, and I'll end with this, the governors have been put in an awful position of making a decision between their economy and the health of their citizens. They're trying to do the best they can. I know Janet Mills in Maine I've been in touch with her pretty regularly. This is really hard stuff. And I think the president was right. I mean, I think the governors are best positioned to make their decisions based upon their circumstances. What's wrong about this picture is the failure of the federal government to supply the adequate testing and tracing resources. That's the missing piece. And that's the piece the governors, you know, they can scramble and do the best they can. I mean, listen to this. Governor Hogan in Maryland somehow got a hold of something like 500,000 test kits from South Korea.
Yeah.
The Korean airline plane was on its way, and he managed to have it diverted from Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Baltimore, Washington, because he was afraid the feds were going to grab those tests when they got to Dulles. I mean, how bad is that? I mean, you know, we shouldn't be doing that. And so that's my frustration, is that, you know, we've kept our side of the bargain in a sense of shutting down, taking the hits, but the federal government hasn't met its side of the bargain of scaling up the testing and giving us the infrastructure that will allow us to reopen safely. So that's the way I see it right now, and I'm glad to take whatever questions my friends want to throw at me.
Well, you know, I think all the governors in New England, we have 4 Democrats, 2 Republican, and they all get very high marks, high 70s, 80s, on how they're handling the COVID-19. All of them, and it's just it's encouraging to see that they're all working together, and we just wish people in Washington would do the same, because it's working in New England. They're communicating, they're talking to each other about whether they should reopen, you know, the economy, when we should do it, what are you doing, what help do you need? I think it's just great to see that. And I've always said that you don't want the economy to be like a traffic light. You go from red to green. You got to go from red to yellow. Slowly, you reopen the economy, because you're right. If we went full blast and reopened the economy, if we had a relapse later in the summer, it'd be devastating, absolutely devastating to the economy, and people would have no confidence at all of going out and going to any of these stores and what have you. So, going slow makes sense.
Well, let me touch on that, Jim, because I think that's an important point. I'm for some reason I'm not exactly clear on. I was appointed to the White House Task Force on Reopening, and we had a conference call earlier this week with Larry Kudlow and a couple of other economic people at the White House. And the point I made was that you guys are focusing almost entirely on the rules, encouraging the governors to raise, you know, to lift the restrictions, the stay-at-home restrictions and the closures. But I think what they're missing is you can lift those restrictions, but people, if they don't feel safe, still aren't going to go. And,
you got it.
And we've got to restore the confidence that people can feel safe. And again, I hate to be a one-trick pony here, but testing is a big way to do that. So that's where I see it right now.
Yeah. And do you think today's announcement that 3 million more Americans have filed for unemployment, now we're up to, I think, I've lost count, but I think it's 36.5 million people have either been laid off or furloughed or terminated just in the last 5 weeks. That number today make people in the White House or the Republicans in the Senate say, hey, wait a minute. What we cannot afford to do is pause. And you're right. That's what I've been hearing from Lindsey Graham, has quoted yesterday saying there'll be no stimulus bill this month in May. So now you're going into June. And Mitch McConnell calls, the speaker's bill, the hero's bill, aspirational, but that's about it. And John Thune kind of dismissed it outright. So your projection,
Jim, I just got a figure this morning that 40% of the workers in America who make less than $40,000 a year have been laid off.
Exactly.
40%.
Right.
You know, if you go back to the early 1930s and the beginning of the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover's great mistake was underestimating it and not acting.
Right.
And everybody agrees it made it much worse. Now, you know, I'm cognizant of the fact that we're just spending money like water here, and it's
Yep.
all borrowed. And on the other
Yeah.
hand, the borrowing cost is as low as it's ever been. And if we don't bring the economy back, that will have a much worse effect on the deficit long term than a shot in the arm to try to get us through this. So I consider myself a guy who's concerned about the deficit, but I
Right.
think right now, you know, it's really, you know, it's an understatement to say it's a crisis proportions. We've got to do something to help people get through this, or it's you know, we're going to have social unrest. It's going to be a progressively more dangerous situation. But again, let me go back to this. I think one of the fundamental problems with the administration's reaction to this from the very beginning is they viewed it as an economic problem, not a health problem.
Problem. Yeah.
And the way to solve the economic problem is to solve the health problem, not vice versa. So, you know, for example, in the last COVID package, the one that refunded the PPP, we had to fight to get money in it for testing. That was considered a concession to the Democrats. I mean, that should have been the first part of the bill. Not that we're having to, you shouldn't have to beat them over the head to say, here's money to improve the testing program. But that's exactly what happened 2 weeks ago. So we've got to do both. And I don't think, I'm not sure people who are safe, who are working, you know, whose jobs are safe, who can work from home, I don't think there's a full realization of how drastic this is and how drastically it's hitting particularly lower income people. People in the hospitality industry, for example, are just you know, being absolutely creamed. And those are the kinds of things that we've got to try to help people get through, or it's just going to spiral downward and get even worse.
And with the Fed Chairman Powell basically saying to Congress yesterday, you need to do more.
Yep.
You need to do more. And I've come to the conclusion that what the economy will look like at the end will depend on what you and your colleagues do today.
Yeah,
so
literally, almost literally today, yeah, this week.
Yeah. And when I hear that they're going to pause and wait until June and then maybe go out on summer vacation or something, I don't think America can wait for that. They need action. You know, there are some things in this HEROES Act that I was very impressed with, that the paycheck program extended beyond July, the $600 bonus that they receive. You want money into the hands of these you know, consumers, that they start spending and help revive the economy. But it just seems to be a disconnect right now with some members of Congress.
Well, we'll keep working at it. I'm right here. I'm 8 blocks from the Capitol, and I head up there when something's happening.
Yeah, we're singing from the same hymn tune, I know. And you're right to give the compliment to SBA. SBA, I think, distributed $30 billion in loans last year, and they were asked to, you know, to distribute over $560 billion in a matter of 13, 14 days, which is extraordinary. That's like 13 years of work that they were asked to do in 13, 14 days with a limited staff and, you know, limited in technology. So I give them compliments and how well they handle the situation.
Well, let me tackle some of those questions. You got some people out there that want to.
Well, one of the questions is, one of your constituents in Maine said, how are we going to pay for all of the federal expenditures? Is this an opportunity to address tax equity? If so, how?
Well, that's a fair question. I mean, I think that's the question. And as I say, there are several mitigating factors, the biggest one of which is interest rates are practically zero. And so if you are going to have to borrow money, now's the time to do it. But on the other hand, look, I got to tell you, I'm a little, I don't get all, it's frustrating that that the people who are now talking about the deficit didn't care about the deficit a couple of years ago.
Right.
And I actually did an interesting calculation, and it was just based on a hunch. And I asked my staff to do the research, talk to the Congressional Budget Office, and get the data. If you took out the two big sets of tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts and the Trump tax cuts, before the coronavirus, this was done about 6 or 8 months ago, we'd have a balanced budget. In other words, the deficit is not a gross increase in spending, it's a gross drop in revenues. We've been spending about 20% of GDP for 70 years in the federal government. Now, within that 20% has changed dramatically what you and I think of as federal expenditure, so-called discretionary spending, defense and non-defense, is way down as a percent of GDP and as a percent of the federal budget. Defense used to be about 8% of GDP. It's now around 3%. So it's less than half of what it was 30, 40 years ago. Non-defense discretionary is also down. What's going up, of course, is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, mostly driven by healthcare costs and demographics. We're getting older. That's just in the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But if we've been at about 20% of GDP, 18, 19, 20, 21%, that's where we've been. With those two sets of tax cuts, we're now at about 16% of GDP in revenues. Well, that's 4% of GDP is almost $1 trillion a year. That's the deficit. Now, I'm not saying you can solve the deficit by raising taxes entirely, but I'm saying a solution to this can't be just cut. Because the deficit is now pretty close to as large as the entire federal discretionary budget. So you could cut everything, Department of Agriculture, FDA, the White House, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, everything, cut everything, and you'd still be barely balancing the budget. So you've got to talk about a much broader picture, and you've got to talk about revenues. So how do we pay for this? I think we've got to have another Simpson Bowles, frankly, a blue ribbon commission, outside people who will take a look at this and look at realistic solutions that don't harm seniors on Social Security, and recognize, what the real expenditures are, what the real revenues should be, and come to some bipartisan resolution. That's going to be really hard, Jim. I can tell you, it's very easy to vote for spending programs. It's really hard to vote to pay for them.
Right.
And I had an amendment. My amendment came within 2 votes of passing on the Trump tax cuts. It was late at night, and we were within 2 votes, and they beat on Bob Corker and Jeff Flake to switch. They were with me. That basically would have said, we can do all the tax cuts, but let's make it tax neutral. Let's make it revenue neutral, not create a $2 trillion deficit. And that amendment lost. So we've got to take a comprehensive look. One other thing, and I know I'm talking too long.
Yeah. Healthcare
is a problem. And we've got to talk about how much healthcare costs, not who's paying for it. I mean, that's important. The ACA, insurance, private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. But the bottom line is we pay almost twice as much per capita for healthcare in this country as anywhere else in the world. And that's what's sinking us. So we've got to be talking more fundamentally about how do we rein in healthcare costs as a percentage of our incomes, as a percentage of GDP. We're at almost 20% of GDP for healthcare costs. That's $1 in $5 of being spent in the whole economy. So anyway, I'll try not to talk so long. Next
I had
time.
a couple more here for you from your constituents. This one's on unemployment in regards to the CARES Act and the HEROES Act and the extension of unemployment benefits related to COVID-19. We have heard concerns from members that at a time when businesses are trying to get businesses and the economy back up and running, the employees are, and in some cases, reluctant to return to work over the coming months. The reason may vary, but underlying an incentive is that they're actually earning comparable income, or in some cases, more income on unemployment than if they came back to work. How does the proposed legislation address that issue, and where do you stand on this concern?
Well, it is a serious concern, and it's one that we looked at the time it was passed. There was a proposal to limit unemployment benefits to 100% of what you were making, because everybody realized that some people were actually going to get more because of $600 was essentially added to whatever the state benefit was.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems with that was it would have been very difficult to calculate, and this sounds like an excuse, but the whole idea was to get money out fast. And you get into paperwork, and it's taken a long time to get this money out anyway. And we were advised that that would have been an additional level of paperwork and calculation that would have slowed. The whole idea of the CARES Act was to get money out on the street as soon as possible, right. And this is certainly an issue. Now, if your employer wants you back, and you're offered a job, you're not entitled to unemployment. And yet I know I've talked to employers that they don't want to be the bad guy and tell their employees, well, you got to come back or you're going to get knocked off unemployment. I think this is a legitimate issue that we just have to continue to try to work through. And in some cases, I think people are getting. In Maine, I think the benefit is about $900. And that's roughly $20 an hour. And a lot of people weren't making that. So I understand the issue, but on the other hand, when you've got the number of people unemployed that we have, I'm a big believer in trying to get that money out there. Again, what we're trying to do is tide us over, get us through this period. This isn't necessarily a long-term stimulus package. And remember, the extended unemployment benefits end on June 30th. Now, right. In the HEROES Act that came with the House, they may be extended to the end of the year. Yeah. I think that's an issue that has to be discussed. That the issue of people not wanting to come back. So I'm sensitive to that. I think that's going to be part of the discussions as we, if there are discussions over the next week.
Mm-hmm. Another question, and you touched on it earlier, the liability issue. CARES Act had a couple narrowly tailored liability waivers. So it seemed that if the Senate Democrats could identify some narrowly tailored liability waivers the caucus can get behind, it might be able to bring Senate Republicans to the table to pass more funding for state, local governments, mortgage, rental relief, and some of the other Democratic priorities. As someone who caucuses with the Democrats, are there any areas of liability waivers that you could probably move in legislation?
Well, my problem is I don't know what Mitch McConnell has in mind. He has made a sort of generalized comment about liability protection, and I was talking to one of my Republican colleagues just 2 days ago about this. We were texting back and forth, and I can't tell what they're talking about. If someone gets COVID on the job, chances are that's covered by workers' comp. And I don't know whether they're talking about waiving workers' comp protection for people that get COVID on the job. I don't know. I hope not, but I don't know. The other question is liability waiver for the general public. And the problem with that I have is what I call moral hazard. If you basically tell people you have a get out of jail free card, then you're enabling them to act irresponsibly. And I'm not saying businesses necessarily would, but it bothers me to say you can't be sued for someone getting COVID on your premises regardless. Now, one possible solution to this that I've thought about is to have a clearly defined set of best practices and then you could say, if the business follows those practices, then they have some level of immunity. If they don't follow those practices, then they're subject to being held liable for negligence. So, but that's the only way out that I can see. A general waiver of liability or a generalized immunity, I think, would be it wouldn't be fair to people who are injured. And by the way, Jim, if if you say, well, the business or the business's liability insurance doesn't have to pay for this, and somebody's in the hospital, somebody's going to pay.
Yeah, sure.
That individual's insurance policy
Right.
or charity care or Medicaid, it's not like the costs of that incident go away. It's a question of who's more innocent, if you will.
Mhm.
So I'm looking, I've sort of been rambling here, but
Yeah.
it's because I don't know what Mitch McConnell's proposing. If
Okay.
he would put something on the table in terms of liability protection, then we can react to it and perhaps we can find a compromise.
Okay. This is a higher education question. As we work to reopen the economy, institutions of higher education are gearing up for the fall. What is your perspective on higher education in the age of COVID-19? And do you think we have enough testing to make it possible to reopen?
Well, the answer to the second question is no. We hopefully will by that time, but one of my problems with the administration's approach to this is they've never really established what the goal is. There's no plan. There's no, here's what the science tells us, and therefore we should have 2 million tests a day or 1.5 million or 3. There's no definition. And, one of my friends in Maine says, if you don't have a destination, you never get there. So I think a very substantial testing program could help. But one of the difficulties, and again, I quote Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's the former head of the FDA. He was on TV this morning, very able, thoughtful guy. And he pointed out that one of the problems is the dormitory issue. You're stacking people in. Colleges, and you have 30 people in a classroom, or sometimes 150 people in a classroom. Colleges, by definition, are congregations of people in close proximity. If we had the testing, if we had adequate testing, I think it's a possibility. Or maybe the disease will be on the decline by then, and people will feel more safe. But I think the colleges are going to really have to wrestle with this. If I were a college president, I would be thinking about testing and isolating, and everybody that comes back on the campus has to be tested, and then some kind of regular testing on the campus. I think if you had a program like that, you could probably do it safely, but it's not going to be easy just because of the nature. I mean, what we've learned from this is the most dangerous places for this disease are in closed spaces. People like in nursing homes, prisons, places where people are in close proximity to one another. And so colleges fit into that category to some extent, and that's where I think the testing comes in.
Okay. A question on manufacturing. Several members of Congress have indicated an interest in addressing the supply chain, potentially looking at proposals to bring operations back home to the United States. There's a chance that debate could be part of the NDAA package and armed services where you serve. Do you agree with your colleagues who want to see that happen, or do you see that some of these changes to the supply chain could be disruptive to the efforts by so many, including pharmaceutical companies, working to address COVID-19?
I think one of the things we've learned from this already is how dangerous it is to rely on another country for a critical part of the supply chain, whether it's chemicals for pharmaceuticals or whether it's computer chips or whatever it is, particularly if the country is one that is, if not an enemy, certainly a rival or an adversary, as China is. I think we've learned that, and I've done a lot of work over the past year in the cyber area, and the same thing goes there. And what I was talking about yesterday, we had a hearing. I was actually sitting right where I'm sitting now. I was a witness at a Senate hearing yesterday, done remotely, on the issue of cyber and protecting the country from a cyber attack. I think we've got to think about paying a little more for parts of the supply chain and considering that incremental cost as an insurance policy. In other words, is it worth paying a little more to have a product that we know is made in the US, that we know is safe, and that it's not made in China or somewhere else that can cut it off or can contaminate it or whatever? I think I'm in favor of bringing back a lot of supply chain if it's if it's critical materials, either in hardware or things like chemicals and that kind of thing. So that is something we're going to be looking at in the defense bill, and I think this pandemic, that's a lesson we've taught us. We've sort of taken for granted just-in-time inventory and supply chains that reach around the world. And I'm not an isolationist, but I do think when it comes to basic important materials, we've got to really be thinking about the fact that it would be a lot safer if they were made here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Got a question here on energy. Has the senator gotten any assurances from the Senate leadership on the Energy and Natural Resource Committee that the comprehensive energy package will get a floor vote anytime soon?
No.
Okay.
Remember what I said earlier about Mitch McConnell? He's got
Yes.
the control, and I have not heard that it's up. I saw Lisa Murkowski on the floor yesterday, and we're certainly hoping to be able to bring that. She's the chair of the committee to bring that bill up. It got derailed over HFCs last time, but hopefully we can try to find a way to bring it up. But that's going to be up to Senator McConnell.
Yeah, exactly. Another energy and question. The House Democrats, as you mentioned earlier, have in their package $1.5 billion for LIHEAP, low-income heating assistance, and another $1.5 billion for a similar program to help consumers with water bills. This amount sadly won't put a dent in ratepayers' default due to COVID-19. Do you see any hope in expanding that amount in the Senate?
I think there is some hope. I think people realize how important those programs are. Certainly we do in Maine. It's a real life, literally a lifeline for people. I think there may be some pressure to increase that. But again, you're talking about several $1 trillion bill, and there's going to be a lot of pushing and hauling. And what worries me, Jim, is whether there will be a bill at all. Because we're hearing all these noises about pausing.
Yep.
And if nothing happens next week, then that really means we're at least 3 weeks away. And then if you add another week to that to sort of get back and get negotiating, you're talking about a month. And frankly, I think I'm hoping that we'll be able to come together on some bill next week that may not be everything that's in the bill coming out of the House, but will be sufficient to plug some of the major holes, to help with the PPP, to particularly help with the state and locals, that will do something, and LIHEAP ought to be part of that.
Here's a question on the Postal Service. The recent focus by some on trying to force the Postal Service arbitrarily raise its package prices during the pandemic is troubling because it would increase package delivery costs for Americans overnight. A prescription that costs $4 for delivery could go up to $24. That's significant, even during good times. The Postal Service package business follows free market principles and has a check and balance by its independent regulators, Postal Regulatory Commission. I know you've been focused on this issue in Maine. I want to thank you for your leadership. I'm hoping you can talk a little about what you are hearing on the ground in Maine about this issue, as well as what you can talk about in Congress as well. So,
well, this issue is really irritating is too mild a word. Let's be honest. This is about President Trump's feud with Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post and also the owner of Amazon. And the president has it in his mind that Amazon is somehow getting a sweetheart deal from the Postal Service on its package delivery. Now, let me say, I don't know what the right price for a package is. I don't know whether it's $1.50 or $2 or $2.50 or $3 or whatever it is. That's why we have this independent postal commission. But whatever it is, that shouldn't be an issue we're litigating in the middle of a pandemic when the post office is running out of operating cash. We ought to be making sure the post office is there. The post office delivers 4 million prescriptions a day, Jim, around the country. Do we really want to endanger that because of this, what I call a feud involving Amazon? And by the way, the Postal Service, as I understand it, makes money on package delivery. They've been, killed on first class mail, as you know. I mean, people use email, they don't use first class mail. Package delivery has actually help the post office to survive. And it's in a competitive market. The post office has to compete with UPS and FedEx and other delivery services on packages. And so they're doing so effectively. And as I understand it, it's not being subsidized. It's a pay-as-you-go proposition. But I'm not an expert on postal rates. I am an expert on the fact that this is the wrong time to be debating this issue. The post office is facing a deficit largely because they've had an unrealistic requirement from Congress to pre-fund their entire pension and healthcare for 75 years. That's taking billions of dollars out of their cash flow every year. Otherwise, they'd be other than that, they'd be in positive territory. So there are postal issues, but right now the key is keep them running through this pandemic because they're an essential link for the country, and don't clutter it up with arguments about what Amazon should be paying for its packages.
Mm-hmm. You know, tomorrow the House will be voting on rules reform, on allowing members to vote proxy, and as well as having the committees remote. You think the Senate would ever get to change those rules, or will they just remain the way they are?
You mean, will the Senate ever leave the 18th century?
Yeah, I'm trying to be kind, Senator.
Yeah, okay. Well, here a couple of different things. Number one, we do have clearance in the Senate from the Rules Committee, which I'm a member, by the way, and I support these changes,
right,
to allow remote hearings as long as they don't entail votes. Now, I'm not clear on why that distinction was made. We can do what I'm doing right now, and I could say aye, and you could hear it.
Yeah.
The clerk could record it. But actually, I participated, as I said yesterday, in one of the Senate's first remote hearings, where all the senators were asking questions, were remote. I was one of 4 witnesses. I was asked questions. I mean, it worked very well. I screwed it up at one point and touched the wrong button, and my screen went blank, but they could still hear me. And I told them I thought that was a better look for me anyway. But there's no reason you can't do that. The in-person voting on the Senate floor is important because it's a time when the senators are all in one place at one time and a lot of business gets done. There's a lot of milling around. I tell people it looks like the dump on Saturday morning. But now that's all gone anyway. I have to go over in about an hour to vote. The floor will be open for 30 or 45 minutes. I've voted now 3 or 4 times, 5 times since this all started. People walk in, everybody has a mask on. There are only 2 or 3 senators on the floor. Everybody walks in, votes, and leaves. So clearly we have the technology, and I wouldn't want to go to an all remote voting. I think that would be bad. I think that would be in contravention of good Senate practice and policy. But in this situation, it seems to me we could do that because, Mitch McConnell basically brought 100 of us back. That brings a lot of staff back. The people that run the Capitol, we've had like a dozen cases of COVID among Capitol police unnecessarily. I mean, and plus, as I say, the last 2 weeks, we haven't done much in the way of anything on COVID. We've approved, yesterday we approved some nominees for, assistant secretary or something, but those were things that really didn't need to have us here. I'm all for coming back. I'm all for doing my job, but to bring everybody back and to bring all the staff and everybody back and put them at risk, unless you're doing something really important, which to me should be COVID related, I just don't think is safe or useful. Now, we have some votes today on FISA, and that's important. Some other significant votes this afternoon, but clearly there's got to be a common ground here where we could do. I think committees could act remotely and be very efficient, and everybody can get their say. That it certainly seemed to work yesterday. Well, the senators yesterday had no trouble questioning me. I can tell you that.
I know we only have a few minutes left. We only have, I think, 2 questions. One is on immigration, and the question is: we are hearing of a possible White House initiatives to restrict non-immigrant visas. What is the Senator's views on this, given the contribution of the two-way free movement of people relaunching economic growth in the United States and other countries?
Well, Jim, it's a tragedy, and again, it's sort of like the postal thing, to use this awful crisis as an excuse to unnecessarily limit legal immigration, and that's what we're talking about. I really think is a violation of both common sense and the qualities that made this country what it is. We are literally a nation of immigrants. Whenever I speak at a swearing-in ceremony, I ask everybody in the audience. I say, "Okay, everybody here who is a immigrant or a descendant of immigrant, please raise your hand." You know, every hand goes up.
Sure.
And to cut that off, I mean, that's one of the secrets of the success of America, is bringing in ideas, thinking, quality, energy from all over the world. That's who we are. And to cut that off is an awful idea. It's only going to hurt the country economically. There's all kinds of data about the contribution of immigrants to how many immigrants have, gotten Nobel Prizes and started businesses. And somebody said that last year, all 6 of the 7 Nobel Prize winners were immigrants from the U.S., and the one who wasn't was Bob Dylan, and no one knows where he's from. But anyway, but seriously, I think it's a terrible idea, bad for the country, bad for the economy, and I think it's just downright wrong to be using this pandemic as an excuse to further a wrong-headed policy that's damaging to this country.
And a subject that you're very, very, very familiar with, cybersecurity. Given New England's leading universities, large talent pool, robust financial services, healthcare, technology sectors, it's not surprising to see that the region is emerging as a hub for cybersecurity best practices, research, and development. As COVID-19 has more of us working, learning, and consulting our doctors from home, it would seem that cybersecurity and your leadership on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report recommendations is now more important than ever. How do you see the Commission recommendations advancing through Congress this year, and what impact this will have on the private sector companies?
I'm going to answer that in a second. Somebody just texted me and said, Bob Dylan's from Hibbing, Minnesota. I know that. I was making a joke. Anyway.
Yeah, see? Yeah.
You can't get away with it.
No joke.
Anyway, let me talk about cyber. And this situation really has heightened the concern, because, as you mentioned, we've got millions of people working from home on home networks, which creates a whole new target for malign cyber actors. What they call the target space has just probably doubled in the country in the last couple of months. The commission that I worked on for the last year has made some really good recommendations, very powerful recommendations. That's what the hearing yesterday was on with the Homeland Security Committee of the Senate, and they were very receptive. Basically, without going in, it was a major report, a lot of work, but we're talking about reorganizing, that is, getting the government better organized to deal with this, because there are pieces of this jurisdiction all over the government, and there needs to be some central authority. We're talking about resilience, which is strengthening our resistance to these kind of attacks throughout the private sector. 85% of the target in critical infrastructure, by the way, is private sector. So there has to be really close relationship between the private sector and the government to stop attacks, to defend against them, to share information, and that kind of thing. The third piece, which I think is really important, and I'll end on this, is deterrence. One of the big problems is that we have not punished people who have attacked us in any substantial way, whether it's the elections, the stealing of intellectual property by China, stealing of data from the federal government. Basically, we've been a cheap date. And one of our major recommendations is that the United States has to establish a clear declaratory policy that if you attack us in cyberspace, you will pay a price. I want them sitting in the Politburo saying, should we do this or not? And if we do, we know they're going to whack us in some way. And
Mhm.
it may be cyber, it may be sanctions, it may be anything. And therefore, maybe we better not do it, because the best cyber attack is the one that doesn't occur. But right now, there's a low cost to our adversaries about coming at us. And the other piece of that is it needs to be international. We need to work with the rest of the world. A sanction is much more effective if it applies everywhere,
Sure.
rather than allow somebody to only be sanctioned in the U.S., but then they can go for their vacation on the south shore of Spain. International sanctions are a lot more powerful. Churchill said, the worst thing is to fight with your enemies, but what's even worse is to fight without your allies. So we need allies, and that's got to be part of this. So yes, cyber is a big issue. It's a dangerous one, and hopefully we've laid out a roadmap for both the Congress and the administration to protect us, to plan ahead, and to be ready for an attack if we can't head it off. But my view is the best way to deal with this is to make it so our adversaries think that we want to be a good ally, a hard target, and a bad enemy. And that's my goal.
The only other cybersecurity is, what is the state of Maine doing to protect businesses against cybersecurity threats? Are there any initiatives in place to help? And with the 505,000 open cybersecurity positions in the United States, what is the state of Maine doing to help with workforce development initiatives?
Well, we've got some really good programs at our colleges and universities. I visited one, for example, at the University of Maine at Augusta that's called a cyber range. It's sort of a live fire place where students learn to deal with these kind of threats. And there's several other of our, I'm going to get in trouble now because I'm not going to mention all of them, but the university, I think Thomas College has a program, and this is, the state of Maine is working on this. And I think we're actually a bit ahead of the game. This cyber range at Augusta is one of the top programs in the country. And you're right, 500,000 empty jobs nationwide in cybersecurity, 35,000 in the US government, empty slots of people needed for cybersecurity. So this is a big need and a big opportunity. And it's one of the things that it's one of our major recommendations is, for example, we recommend creating a ROTC kind of program, ROTC scholarships for people that make a commitment to work in cyber defense when they get out of college. So we've got to think big about this because it is a very, very serious threat.
That's great. There's good news out there for you, Senator. The Gallup poll just announced that you have a United States Senate and entire Congress has a favorability of 30% now. So you're going up. So people are having confidence in it. So that's the good news. You're on the right
They
track.
must have polled Mary and my kids. I don't know. But that's actually the best it's been for a long time.
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. So you're doing something right. And seriously, I think people are turning to you, government, for help. And rather than saying the government's the enemy, now they're saying maybe government is the solution, and seeing people work together gives them confidence. So hopefully those numbers will continue. But I just want to thank you, Senator. We've had 1 hour. I believe it's 12 o'clock. All the questions from your constituents have been asked, and you've been answering them. And I just want to say thank you for all that you do. You've been so accommodating to the council and being accessible, approachable, and you're a key advocate to have in our corner in New England because of the positions that you have in the committees and your advocacy and obviously the passion that you bring to it and the intellect.
Well,
so I just want to thank you
thanks,
for all
Jim.
of you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor to represent Maine and the region, and I certainly always enjoy these sessions, and I look forward to the next one, hopefully in person. Let's concentrate on that happening. Thanks again, Jim, and thanks to all the members.
Stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.